What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 18 Week 10 tight end rankings. I've already gone through my running backs, wide receivers, defenses, quarterbacks. Now we're wrapping it up here with the tight end position, diving into the different tiers. If you guys enjoy the video, smash that like button, subscribe. But let's just jump right into tier 1 here. And we have a couple of the usual suspects, and then one guy who has just skyrocketed over the last couple of weeks. So we're going to start off. My tight end 1 is going to be George Kittle. He has been the tight end 1 in points per game by a pretty wide margin. He is averaging 3.8 PPR points per game more than the tight end 2. The 49ers are second in implied points this week. I feel like it would be disrespectful to have anyone except for George Kittle, up here as the number 1 tight end spot. Then my number 2 is going to be Travis Kelce going up against the Broncos. After a slow start to the season, he has put up 15 plus PPR points in 4 of his last 5. His last 2 games, the best 2 of his season, 22 and 25 PPR points. And then just the massive riser over the last few weeks here, Cade Otton going up against the 49ers. Now, I was someone who wasn't overly optimistic about Cade Otton with the injuries to Evans and Godwin. I definitely got the argument like, all right, he's going to be a bigger focal point of the offense. The volume is going to be there. But you actually have to be a talented player to take advantage of that. Just because a starting wide receiver goes down, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's just going to step right in and, pretty much dominate in the same way those players have. Especially you look at this wide receiver room, there's nothing going on at the wide receiver position. And so the fact that Cade Otton's been able to produce with, extra attention on him is insanely impressive. His last 2 games with no Evans, no Godwin, he's gone 9 for 81 with 2 touchdowns and then 8 for 77 with a touchdown. It's insanely impressive. Cade Otton deserves his respect. Have him here in tier 1 with the big dogs, George Kittle and Travis Kelce. Now, tier 2, I think these guys are also very strong plays. We have Trey McBride going up against the Jets. He's been fairly consistent, 10 plus PPR points in his last 5. I don't think he has the same ceiling as some of the guys ranked ahead of him. Still has 0 receiving touchdowns. He has 2 overall touchdowns. I believe he had a rushing touchdown in week 9, and then he had a fumble recovery touchdown. Should have been a bigger game for him. Kyler missed him just wide open in the end zone, like inside the 5. So that was a tough break if you do roster Trey McBride, but I still think he's a very solid play. My tight end 5 is going to be Evan Ingram going up against the Vikings. He didn't have a huge week 9, but usage-wise, it was pretty encouraging. We know the Christian Kirk injury was a massive bump to him last year, was averaging like 19 PPR points per game in the 6 without Christian Kirk. Week 9, no Kirk. He sees 10 targets. If that type of volume continues, he is going to be a very strong play. And then a massive riser here in Mike Gesicki going up against the Ravens. In his last 2 games with no T. Higgins, he has gone 7 for 73 and then 5 for 102 touchdowns. And I think you could make the argument like if T. Higgins comes back, is his production just going to completely fall off? And I think you could make that case, except for the fact that Eric All is now out for the season with a torn ACL. He was one of the tight ends on this roster that was kind of cutting into the usage for Mike Gesicki. So even if Higgins does return, I still think Gesicki could be a factor. This ranking here as the tight end 6 is assuming that T. Higgins is not going to be able to give it a go on Thursday night. Doesn't seem like he's trending towards playing. So Mike Gesicki very well could be the number 2 target here for as long as T. Higgins is out. And that makes him a very strong option at the tight end position. Plus a game that could definitely turn into a shootout. Bengals are pretty solid dogs in this one, so the passing volume should be there for Joe Burrow and then for Mike Gesicki. Now looking at tier 3, kind of like our mid to back end tight end ones, my tight end 7 is going to be Kyle Pitts. Week 9 was really his first down game in 5 weeks. In his last 5, he had 10 plus PPR points in 4 of those, so he had found some consistency. Kind of came back down to earth, which was odd in a game where Drake London left pretty early on. So not ideal. The floor is not still overly high, but he's one of the top targets on a fairly good passing attack. So I still think he's a fine option week to week. Then after Kyle Pitts, going to go with Hunter Henry. We have a 3-game sample size of Drake May, playing the full game as the starter. In those 3 games, Hunter Henry has put up 13.1, 17.2, and 12.6 PPR points. He looks like Drake May's, number 1 target. And at the tight end position, that is very valuable. So I like him here as my tight end 8. A riser just based on a potential injury is Mark Andrews here going up against the Bengals. He's pretty much showed us this season that he is very touchdown or bust. The usage isn't going to be great. The volume isn't going to be great. He's not going to be running a high percentage of routes, but he's going to be on a good offense that is going to score a lot of points, and that is going to give him some touchdown upside. We saw he had a nice 3-4 game stretch where he was getting into the end zone just week after week. This Ravens team is first in implied points, but the injury I wanted to point out was it's not looking great for Isaiah Likely, dealing with a hamstring injury to play on Thursday night. So if Likely's out, I do think we could see a little bit of an expanded role for Mark Andrews. I don't necessarily think he's going to jump back to the usage we've seen in previous seasons. I think Charlie Kohler's probably going to get more involved, but I do think an injury to Likely, if he misses this game, does make Mark Andrews more of a nice option in the top 10. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be TJ Hawkinson. He made his season debut in week 9. Didn't have a massive role, which wasn't shocking first game back from a torn ACL. Had a 63% route participation, which is fine, especially if he's going to build on that. 4 targets, 3 receptions, 27 yards. I do think, though, that this is a nice matchup here against this Jaguars defense. The Vikings are 5th in implied points, projecting, a role increase here for Hawkinson with the nice matchup. I think he's a top 10 option this week. Now, moving into a pretty small tier 4, my tight end 11 is going to be Dalton Kincaid. And I think at this point, it's kind of fair to say that Kincaid has been a pretty disappointing pick. The concern for Kincaid was always was he talented enough to take advantage of his opportunity? He was positioned in a spot where the wide receiver room was up in the air. You had Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis leave. You had Keon Coleman come in, Khalil Shakir potentially stepping up. But Dalton Kincaid looked like he had a real shot to be the number 1 target there. The problem was, and we knew this heading into the season, he hadn't yet proved that he was this great option, this future, top tight end in the league. And like I talked about earlier on with Kate Otten, targets are earned, not given. You have to be good enough to take advantage of those opportunities. And so far, it just doesn't seem like he's at that level of tight end. His usage has been solid. He's 5th in targets. He's 6th in target share. If you told me that coming into the season with Josh Allen at quarterback on this Bills offense, I would have thought he'd be a locked in, top 5 tight end week to week. He's the tight end 14 in points per game. So the volume is nice. The efficiency, the touchdowns, everything else just hasn't really followed, which leaves him here as a back end tight end 1. And then the other guy in this tier, Taysom Hill, going up against the Falcons. We pretty much got the full Taysom Hill experience in week 9, I guess minus him throwing a few pass attempts, but he was targeted 5 times, caught 4 of them for 41 yards. He had 5 carries for 19 yards and a touchdown. I really do think that with the injuries to Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill is going to have more games like this where he's used as a weapon in the pass game, he's involved on the ground, he's working in near the goal line. And as a fringe tight end 1, I do think that role is playable week to week. So someone who's definitely interesting and could potentially have been sitting out on the waiver wire. I talked about him in my waiver wire video earlier in the week. Now looking at tier 5 here, kind of some depressing names here of guys that we thought would be better this year. I mean, the first one here, Sam Laporta, he has 6 games this season with under 10 PPR points. And at this point, he's kind of been relegated to touchdown or bust, where it's if he gets into the end zone, cool. If he rips off a big play, he could pan out. But if not, he just doesn't have the weekly floor to be a consistent starter. So the Lions are 3rd in implied points this week. He could get into the end zone, sure, but the fall off from what we saw last year to this year is pretty insane, given how, impressive his production was as a rookie tight end. After Laporta, going to go with a faller here in Jake Ferguson. Obviously, this is due to the Dak injury. The Cowboys have the 4th fewest implied points. Jake Ferguson, was a beneficiary of being the number 2 target for Dak Prescott. That is no longer the case. Then we have Zach Ertz going up against the Steelers here. Zach Ertz was kind of, rolling a little bit. Week 6 through 8, he had 3 straight games with 10 plus PPR points. Then week 9, his worst game of the season, 1.5 PPR points. So the floor isn't super high. The ceiling isn't super high, but he's a solid veteran tight end on a good offense. You could do worse than him in your tight end spot. And then the last guy in this tier, Cole Kmet. It seemed like prior to the bye week, this Bears offense was breaking through. Cole Kmet was coming off a huge boom game, 24 points in week 6. They head into the bye, and then the next 2 weeks, this offense has seemingly just fallen apart. Cole Kmet specifically, 4.4 points in week 8, and then a goose egg in week 9. It's pretty concerning because you would assume with a rookie quarterback coming out of the bye week, this would be a unit that's starting to look better, continuing to improve. It seems like they're falling off at this point. So not ideal. I still think within this tier, like he has maybe the highest ceiling amongst these guys. Like he has two, I think 24 plus PPR point games, but the floor is very, very low and pretty much non-existent like we saw in week 9. And then the final tier here is going to be Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. You don't feel great about either of these dudes. For Jonnu Smith, he's been targeted 6+ times in each of the last 4 weeks, so somewhat consistent volume, and it's led to fine fantasy production. And then Pat Freiermuth here, he's been pretty disappointing. He's the tight end 20 in points per game, kind of just where he's settling in, less than 10 points in each of his last 4. I guess the hope here, though, is like it's a 2-game sample size with Russ. The passing attack has looked better. He still potentially could benefit from that moving forward. But that's going to wrap it up for my top 18. Definitely missing some potential options with the bye week. Dallas Goedert injury, didn't rank him in this video. We'll see if he plays this week. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.